The sharp crack of skin meeting skin echoed through the sterile, brightly lit aisle of the Elysian Fields department store, silencing the gentle hum of commerce. Shoppers froze, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. 16-year-old Serenity stood perfectly still, the stinging imprint of a hand blooming on her cheek. Her glasses were askew, but her eyes, wide and clear, remained fixed on the woman before her. The store manager, a woman with a tight blonde bun and a name tag that read Karen, was breathing heavily, her own hand still raised, her face contorted in a mask of righteous fury. "I told you to empty your pockets, you little thief!" Karen hissed, her voice trembling with a venom that had been brewing long before this moment. The slap was more than just a physical blow. It was a sonic boom that ripped through the placid afternoon atmosphere of Elysian Fields, a high-end department store known for its curated collections and clientele of quiet wealth. For a suspended moment, the only sound was the distant, tinny melody of a pop song playing over the store's speakers, a bizarrely cheerful soundtrack to a moment of stark ugliness. Serenity's cheek throbbed, a hot, radiating pain that seemed to pulse in time with her suddenly racing heart. She could feel the stares of at least a dozen people in the wide, marble-floored aisle. A woman in a cashmere coat gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A young man, barely older than Serenity, quickly pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. But no one moved. No one spoke. They were statues in a tableau of disbelief. The manager, Karen, seemed to swell with the attention. Her face, flushed with adrenaline, was a mask of self-righteous conviction. Her eyes, small and piercing, raked over Serenity's simple attire. Jeans, a well-worn band t-shirt, and sneakers, as if they were irrefutable evidence of guilt. "Well, are you going to do it?" Karen's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Or do I have to have security drag you out of here? Empty your pockets, and that bag." She gestured dismissively at the worn leather satchel slung over Serenity's shoulder, a gift from her father years ago. Serenity adjusted her glasses, her movements slow and deliberate. Inside, a storm of emotions was raging, shock, humiliation, a deep, searing anger. But on the surface, she projected an unnerving calm. This was a composure drilled into her from a young age, a shield forged in the countless small aggressions and micro-slights she'd learned to navigate. "Never let them see you break," her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Your dignity is the one thing they can never take unless you give it to them." She met Karen's gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "I haven't stolen anything," she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a clarity that seemed to push back against the manager's hysteria. "They all say that," Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "I saw you, lingering by the designer perfumes, slipping things into your bag when you thought no one was looking. You people are always so brazen." "You people." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was the casual, venomous generalization that stung more than the slap. It recontextualized the entire encounter, stripping away any pretense of a simple misunderstanding. This wasn't about a suspected theft. It was about a girl with brown skin existing in a space Karen believed she didn't belong. Serenity had been in the store for maybe 15 minutes. She was looking for a specific, rare book on astrophysics in the store's surprisingly well-stocked literary section, a birthday gift for her grandfather. The perfume aisle was simply on the way. She had paused to admire a bottle shaped like a crescent moon, momentarily captivated by the craftsmanship, before moving on. That brief moment of appreciation had been twisted into an act of criminality in the manager's eyes. "I was on my way to the bookstore section," Serenity explained, keeping her tone even. "I can show you my wallet. I haven't purchased anything yet. There is nothing in my bag but my phone, a book I'm currently reading, and my keys." "Show me then," Karen demanded, her hand outstretched, palm up, as if expecting a tribute. Slowly, deliberately, Serenity unslung her satchel. She placed it on a nearby display table filled with neatly folded silk scarves. Her hands moved with a grace that defied the accusation, a stark contrast to Karen's agitated energy. She first pulled out her phone, its screen dark, then a worn paperback copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos. Finally, a small set of keys on a simple silver ring. She unzipped the main compartment, revealing an empty interior. Then she turned her pockets inside out. They, too, were empty. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. The young man who had been about to record lowered his phone slightly, a look of confusion on his face. The woman in the cashmere coat now looked directly at Karen, her expression shifting from shock to disapproval. The lack of evidence seemed to enrage Karen further. Her face reddened. She had committed a public, violent act. She had slapped a child, and for what? An empty bag and a quiet denial. The foundation of her righteous fury was crumbling, and rather than retreat, she chose to dig in deeper, to rebuild her justification with louder, more baseless accusations. "You probably stashed it somewhere," she snarled, her eyes darting around wildly. "Or passed it off to an accomplice. I want security down here now." She bellowed toward the ceiling, as if expecting a guard to rappel from the rafters. "Full search! And call the police! I'm pressing charges!" The threat was absurd, untethered from the reality of the empty bag on the table. But Karen was no longer operating in reality. She was in a world of her own making, a world where her prejudices were facts and her assumptions were evidence. She had initiated a conflict she could not win with grace, and so she was determined to win it with force, wielding the power of her position like a cudgel. Serenity looked at the woman, and for the first time, a flicker of pity pierced through her anger. She saw a person so trapped in her own bitter narrative that she couldn't see the truth, even when it was laid bare before her. The manager of this temple of luxury, this Elysian Fields, was blind to everything but the color of a customer's skin. And as the first uniformed security guard arrived, his face a mask of stern neutrality, Serenity stood her ground, her composure her armor. She did not know how this would end, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let this woman, or this moment, shatter her. The slap had echoed, but her silence, her dignity, was a sound all its own. To understand Serenity's composure in the face of such public humiliation, one would have to understand the world she came from. A world meticulously constructed by her mother, Dr. Alana James. The world knew Alana James, if it knew her at all, as a reclusive genius, the mind behind Helios Innovations, a tech conglomerate that had quietly revolutionized renewable energy and data security. Her name was whispered in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley and the financial hubs of London and Tokyo, but her face was virtually unknown. She shunned the spotlight, valuing privacy with an almost religious fervor. Forbes and Bloomberg estimated her net worth in the 11-figure range, but she lived in a modest, though elegant, home, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and her favorite pastime was tending to her collection of rare orchids. Alana had built her empire from nothing, fueled by a brilliant mind and an unshakable will. She had navigated the treacherous, predominantly white and male landscape of the tech industry, facing down venture capitalists who underestimated her and competitors who tried to steal her work. She'd endured the subtle barbs, the condescending tones, the meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant. Every slight, every obstacle had been a lesson she'd absorbed and later passed down to her daughter, not as a source of bitterness, but as a blueprint for resilience. Serenity's childhood was a unique blend of the extraordinary and the ordinary. One day, she would be sitting on the floor of her mother's home office, watching her sketch out complex algorithms that would later power a city's energy grid. The next, they would be in the kitchen, covered in flour, arguing playfully over the correct way to knead bread dough. There were no private jets or ostentatious displays of wealth. Alana believed that money was a tool, not an identity. It provided freedom and security, but true wealth, she taught Serenity, was in knowledge, integrity, and self-possession. "There will be people in this world, my love," Alana had told her once, while they were sitting on a park bench, watching the world go by, "who will try to write your story for you before you've even had a chance to pick up the pen. They will see your beautiful brown skin, and they will decide you are poor or uneducated or dangerous. They will see you are a woman, and they will decide you are weak or emotional or less capable. They will look at you and see a story they've already written in their own heads." She had tucked a stray braid behind Serenity's ear, her touch gentle but her gaze intense. "You must never, ever let their story become yours. You know who you are. You are the daughter of a woman who builds worlds from numbers and light. You are the granddaughter of a man who can recite Shakespeare by heart and a woman who taught a generation of children to read. You are brilliant and kind and strong. That is your truth. Hold on to it. And when they try to hand you their cheap, poorly written narrative, you smile and you politely refuse to accept it." This lesson was the bedrock of Serenity's existence. It was why she didn't flinch when a teacher expressed surprise at her high test scores, or why she didn't react when a sales associate in a luxury store would pointedly ignore her. She saw these moments not as reflections of her own worth, but as sad revelations of the other person's limitations. Her mother had also taught her about the nature of power. "True power, Serenity, is quiet," Alana explained, while pruning a delicate Phalaenopsis orchid. "It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to bully or intimidate. Arrogance is a costume that insecure people wear to convince the world they are important. True power is in your competence, your knowledge, your character. It's the ability to change the world without needing the world to applaud you for it." This philosophy was why Alana owned Elysian Fields. It wasn't a passion project or a vanity acquisition. She hadn't bought the struggling retail chain 3 years ago because she loved fashion. She'd bought it because its logistics and supply chain management system was an outdated mess, and she saw it as a fascinating puzzle to solve. She had acquired the parent company through a series of discrete holding corporations, restructured the debt, and implemented a new, hyper-efficient inventory AI she'd designed herself. The board of directors knew her only as a disembodied voice on quarterly conference calls, a brilliant strategist who had turned their failing company into a model of profitability. None of them, let alone the manager of a single store in a mid-sized city, had ever seen her face. Elysian Fields was just one piece of her vast, invisible empire. For Serenity, it was just the store mom fixed. She'd heard her mother talk about data flow and warehouse automation, but she had no real sense of the scale of the ownership. So when she stood in that aisle, with Karen's venomous words washing over her and the security guard's suspicious eyes boring into her, she wasn't thinking, "This woman is about to get fired." She wasn't thinking about her mother's billions or her hidden ownership. Those were abstract facts, disconnected from the raw, visceral reality of the moment. Instead, she was drawing on the deeper well of her mother's teachings. She was holding on to her truth. "I am not a thief. I am Serenity James. I am here to buy a book for my grandfather." She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, a calming technique her mother had taught her for moments of high stress. She met the guard's gaze with the same clear, unwavering calm she had shown Karen. "I have emptied my bag and my pockets," she said to the guard, her voice a steady anchor in the swirling sea of tension. "The manager is making a false accusation." The guard, a burly man named Frank, looked from the serene teenager to the apoplectic manager. He had worked at Elysian Fields for 5 years. He'd seen real shoplifters, nervous, shifty, and quick to flee. This girl was none of those things. But Karen was his boss. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Standard procedure is to come to the back office while we review the security footage." "No," Karen snapped. "I want her held here. I want the police. She's a flight risk." The absurdity of the statement, a 16-year-old girl surrounded by a dozen witnesses and a security guard being a flight risk, was lost on Karen. But it wasn't lost on the growing crowd of onlookers. Whispers turned into audible murmurs. The young man with the phone was now openly recording, panning from Serenity's calm face to Karen's contorted one. The narrative Karen was trying so desperately to write was being erased in real time by her own escalating hysteria, and in its place, Serenity's quiet strength was beginning to tell a story of its own. The aisle had transformed from a retail space into a courtroom, and the shoppers had become a jury. Every new person who rounded the corner, drawn by the commotion, stopped to watch the drama unfold. The tension was a palpable thing, thick and cloying like the expensive perfume surrounding them. Karen, emboldened by the arrival of the security guard, Frank, seemed determined to put on a show. "I am the manager of this store," she announced to the crowd, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "And I will not tolerate criminals in our establishment. This girl was caught red-handed. We have a zero-tolerance policy." Her declaration was met with a few uncertain nods, but mostly with skeptical silence. The evidence, or lack thereof, was sitting on the display table for all to see. Serenity's empty bag and pockets were a quiet but powerful rebuttal to Karen's increasingly frantic claims. Frank, the security guard, looked deeply uncomfortable. He was caught between his duty to his superior and the evidence of his own eyes. "Karen," he said in a low voice, trying to de-escalate. "Maybe we should just go to the office. We can look at the tapes. It'll be quick." "The tapes will prove I'm right," she shot back, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I'm not letting her out of my sight. She's probably got the merchandise hidden on her person, under her shirt maybe." This new accusation was a vile escalation. Karen took a step toward Serenity, her eyes glinting with a malicious intent. "You want to prove your innocence? Lift up your shirt." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The woman in the cashmere coat, who had been watching with growing horror, finally found her voice. "That is completely inappropriate," she exclaimed, her voice sharp with indignation. "You can't ask a child to do that. What is wrong with you?" The young man recording the scene made a point of zooming in on Karen's face. "Yeah, lady," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "You're way out of line." Public opinion was turning, swiftly and decisively, against Karen. The jury was reaching a verdict. But Karen was too deep in her delusion to notice. She saw their disapproval not as a critique of her actions, but as a defense of the person she had already condemned. "Oh, so you're all on her side?" Karen sneered, gesturing wildly at the onlookers. "You don't know her kind. They're masters of deception. She probably has a whole sob story ready to go." Serenity, who had remained silent through this latest tirade, finally spoke. Her voice was still quiet, but it sliced through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "My kind?" she repeated, her eyes locking onto Karen's. "What kind is that exactly? The kind that enjoys reading books about the universe? The kind that wants to buy a birthday present for her grandfather?" The simple, direct questions hung in the air, exposing the ugly prejudice underpinning Karen's entire argument. She had no answer. She had only stereotypes and baseless fury. Flustered, Karen fell back on her authority. "Frank, do your job!" she shrieked. "Get her under control!" Frank looked at Serenity, who stood her ground, radiating a calm that felt more powerful than Karen's rage. Then he looked at the phone recording him, and the dozen other phones that had since emerged from pockets and purses. He was a man who followed procedure, and this circus was anything but. My job is to investigate suspected theft and ensure the safety of customers, he said, his voice firm and professional. It is not my job to assault them. We will go to the office and review the footage. That is the proper procedure. He then looked at Serenity. Ma'am, will you please accompany me? He had called her ma'am. It was a small thing, a simple courtesy, but in the context of the last 10 minutes, it was a profound gesture of respect. It was an acknowledgement of her humanity, something Karen had been relentlessly trying to strip away. Of course, Serenity said, giving him a small, grateful nod. As she picked up her bag and her book, the crowd parted for her, creating a path. Their faces were no longer just curious, they were sympathetic. One older woman reached out and briefly touched her arm. You're handling this with so much grace, dear, she whispered. The walk to the back of the store was a walk of shame, but not for Serenity. It was Karen who stalked behind them, fuming, her humiliation radiating from her in waves. The whispers of the shoppers followed them, a chorus of disapproval. Can you believe her? She slapped that poor girl. I'm reporting this. I got the whole thing on video. The manager's office was a small, cluttered room that smelled of stale coffee and air freshener. It was a stark contrast to the polished, airy elegance of the store's public spaces. A large monitor on the desk was connected to the store's extensive surveillance system. Pull up the feed from cosmetics, aisle 4, Karen commanded, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. 15 minutes ago, Frank typed a few commands, and the screen flickered to life, showing a grid of different camera angles. He located the correct one, a high-angle shot that gave a clear view of the perfume displays. They watched in silence as the footage played. There she was. Serenity. She walked into the frame, paused by the display case, picked up the crescent moon bottle, admired it for a few seconds, placed it carefully back on the shelf, and then continued walking out of frame toward the bookstore. Her satchel was at her side the entire time. Her hands were always visible. She never once reached into her bag or concealed any item. The video was a silent, objective, and damning refutation of everything Karen had claimed. The silence in the small office was absolute. Frank leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't need to. The monitor showed the truth in stark, high-definition black and white. There was no theft. There was no crime. There was only a manager's baseless suspicion, fueled by a prejudice so profound it had allowed her to see a crime where none existed. Karen stared at the screen, her face ashen. The video didn't just prove Serenity was innocent. It proved that she, Karen, was a liar. Or worse, that she was delusional. The foundation of her reality had been pulverized. There was a long, agonizing pause. Then, instead of apologizing, instead of showing a shred of remorse, she whispered, her voice hoarse with disbelief. She must have known where the cameras were. It's a trick. It was at that precise moment, as Karen chose to descend even further into her paranoid fantasy, that a soft knock sounded at the office door. Frank, grateful for the interruption, stood to open the door. Standing in the hallway was a woman who seemed, at first glance, utterly unremarkable. She was of medium height and build, dressed in simple, elegant gray trousers and a black turtleneck. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, low bun, and she wore no makeup or jewelry, save for a plain, practical watch on her wrist. There was a quiet intensity in her dark, intelligent eyes, a sense of stillness and observation that commanded attention without demanding it. She carried no purse, only a slim tablet in one hand. Her expression was one of calm neutrality as her gaze swept over the cramped office, taking in the scene. The flustered guard, the ashen-faced manager staring at the security monitor, and the composed young girl standing near the desk. Her eyes lingered on Serenity for a fraction of a second longer. A flicker of something. Concern. Pride. Love. Passing through them before she turned her attention to Frank. I am Dr. Alana James, she said, her voice soft but resonant, each word spoken with deliberate precision. I believe you have my daughter in here. The name meant nothing to Karen or Frank. It was just a name. Karen, still reeling from the video evidence, saw only another obstacle, another person siding against her. And who are you? Karen snapped, her voice still ragged. The girl's mother? Here to make excuses for her? Well, you're too late. She's being detained for shoplifting. Alana's gaze shifted to Karen. She didn't react to the hostile tone. She simply observed the manager, her expression unchanging, as if studying a particularly interesting but flawed specimen under a microscope. Detained? Alana repeated the word, her tone mild. On what grounds? I was under the impression that to detain someone you must have evidence of a crime being committed. I saw her, Karen insisted, pointing a shaky finger back at the monitor, which now showed a frozen image of Serenity admiring the perfume bottle. The video? It's been tampered with. Or she's a professional. They know how to cheat the cameras. Alana let the silence hang in the air for a moment, allowing the sheer irrationality of Karen's statement to fill the small space. Then she turned back to Frank. You're the head of security? She asked. Just a guard, ma'am, Frank corrected her. Frank Miller. Mr. Miller, Alana said, her tone respectful. You've reviewed this footage? Yes, ma'am, Frank confirmed. There's nothing on it. The girl didn't take anything. I saw it with my own eyes. She's innocent. He shot a quick, almost apologetic glance at Serenity. I see, Alana said. She then looked at her daughter. Serenity, this woman, the manager, she accused you publicly? Serenity nodded. Yes, Mom. And did she touch you? Alana's voice remained perfectly level, but there was a new, razor-sharp edge to it that hadn't been there before. She slapped me, Serenity said, her own voice quiet but clear. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Frank shifted his weight uncomfortably. Karen's pale face went a shade paler. Alana's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes, now fixed on Karen, seemed to darken, becoming deep, unreadable pools. For the first time, a sliver of genuine fear seemed to pierce Karen's self-righteous armor. The sheer, unshakable composure of this newcomer was more unnerving than any shouted threat could ever be. My daughter tells me she was slapped, in front of other customers. By you, Alana stated, her voice a low, dangerous hum. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that was now being entered into a permanent record. She was being uncooperative. I suspected she had stolen a high-value item, Karen stammered, her defense sounding weak and hollow even to her own ears. You suspected, Alana repeated softly, and your suspicion, which has now been proven false by your own security system, was justification for assaulting a minor. Alana took a single deliberate step into the office. She held up the tablet she was carrying. With a few taps of her finger, she brought up a document on the screen. A complex flowchart of corporate entities and holding companies. My name, as I said, is Dr. Alana James. While I'm sure the name is unfamiliar to you, perhaps the name of the primary holding company that acquired the Elysian Retail Group 3 years ago is not. It's called the Phoenix Strategic Investment Firm. She highlighted the name on the screen with her finger. Karen and Frank stared at her blankly. The name meant nothing to them. They were store-level employees, far removed from the arcane world of corporate acquisitions and investment firms. Alana seemed to have expected this. She sighed softly, a sound of faint disappointment, as if a student had failed to grasp a simple concept. Let me put it in simpler terms, she said, her voice losing its gentle edge and taking on the cold, hard authority of a CEO addressing an underperforming board. Phoenix Strategic owns Elysian, and I own Phoenix Strategic. She paused, letting the words settle. This is my company, this is my store, and you, she said, her eyes locking onto Karen's, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. Just assaulted my daughter in it. The revelation did not land with a thunderous crash, but with the deafening silence of a universe imploding. Karen's face, which had cycled through rage, panic, and denial, went utterly blank. Her brain seemed to short-circuit, unable to process the information it had just received. The words, "I own this store," echoed in the small office, rearranging the very molecules of the reality she had inhabited just moments before. Frank Miller, the security guard, was the first to react. His eyes widened, and he took an involuntary step back, as if the sheer gravitational pull of the woman in front of him had suddenly increased. He looked from Alana's calm, authoritative face to the corporate flowchart on her tablet, and then back again. He was a man who understood hierarchies, who understood power, and he recognized, with the certainty of a career spent observing people, that he was in the presence of a power so immense it was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a bluff. This was a checkmate. Karen, however, remained frozen. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The carefully constructed world she ruled, her little kingdom of retail where she was the arbiter of who belonged and who did not, had just been vaporized. She was no longer a queen on her throne. She was a trespasser in someone else's house. You're lying!" she finally managed to whisper, the words devoid of conviction. It was a reflexive denial, the last gasp of a dying worldview. Alana didn't bother to respond to the accusation. It was beneath her. Instead, she tapped another icon on her tablet. A new face appeared on the screen. A man in a sharp suit, with silver hair and a stern expression. It was a live video call. "David," Alana said, her voice once again calm and professional. "Apologies for the unscheduled call. I'm currently at the Northgate Mall location." The man on the screen, David Chen, Chief Operating Officer of the Elysian Retail Group, looked momentarily confused, then concerned. "Dr. James, is everything all right? We weren't aware you were conducting a site visit." The name Dr. James finally registered with Karen. The disembodied voice from the quarterly conference calls, the mysterious, unseen owner who had turned the company around. A wave of nausea washed over her. It was true. All of it. "There's been an incident, David," Alana continued, her tone clipped and efficient. "I need you to do 3 things for me immediately. First, get me a direct line to the regional manager for this district. Second, have our head of corporate security begin a full internal investigation into store manager Karen." She paused, glancing at the manager's name tag, Weston. "The investigation is to cover employee conduct, customer complaints, and adherence to company policy. Third, I want our legal team on standby. There has been a physical assault on a minor on store property, perpetrated by Ms. Weston." Each command was a hammer blow, dismantling what was left of Karen's professional life. David Chen, on the other side of the call, was scribbling furious notes, his face a mask of grim efficiency. "Right away, Dr. James. I'll have the RM on the line for you in 2 minutes." The call ended. Alana turned her attention back to the office. Her gaze fell on Serenity, who had been watching the entire exchange with a quiet, somber expression. Alana's face softened for a moment. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice losing its icy edge and filling with maternal warmth. Serenity nodded. "I'm okay, Mom." Alana then looked at Frank. "Mr. Miller, thank you for your professionalism. Please ensure that all security footage from ISIL 4 and this office, from the moment my daughter entered the store until now, is preserved. Do not delete anything. A team from corporate will be here within the hour to secure it." "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, Dr. James," Frank said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and relief. He was a man who appreciated order and justice, and he was watching it being delivered with breathtaking efficiency. Finally, Alana turned her gaze back to Karen. The manager had collapsed into her office chair, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, desperate sobs. The fury was gone, the arrogance stripped away, leaving behind a pathetic, crumbling ruin of a person. All the power she had so carelessly wielded just minutes before had vanished. She was left with nothing but the devastating consequences of her actions. Alana watched her for a moment, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction. There was only a profound sense of disappointment and a weary sadness. This was not a victory she savored. It was a mess that needed to be cleaned up. "Ms. Weston," Alana said, her voice even, "you will remain here until the regional manager arrives to accept your keys and your security credentials. You are, effective immediately, suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. You are not to have any further contact with my daughter. Is that understood?" Karen could only manage a choked, desperate nod, not daring to look up. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been fundamentally rewritten. The narrative Karen had tried to force upon Serenity, a story of criminality and otherness, had been exposed as a work of prejudiced fiction. Now, a new story was being written, one of accountability and truth. And it was being authored by the quiet, unassuming woman who owned the very ground on which they stood. The slap had echoed through the store, but the quiet words of Alana James had shaken its very foundations. The hour that followed was a masterclass in corporate efficiency and damage control, orchestrated remotely by Alana from the small, sterile office. The regional manager, a man named Mark, arrived in a record 22 minutes, his face pale and his suit slightly rumpled from a hastily abandoned lunch. He entered the office with the nervous energy of a man summoned to meet his maker. He offered a torrent of apologies to Alana and Serenity, his voice laced with a genuine horror at what had transpired in one of his stores. Alana cut him off, not unkindly. "Apologies are noted, Mark," she said, "but what I require now is action. The priority is ensuring this never happens again." While Mark formally collected Karen's keys and ID badge, escorting a now completely shattered woman from the office, a two-person team from corporate security arrived. They were discreet, professional, and moved with a quiet purpose that spoke of extensive training. Led by a woman named Maria, they immediately began the process of securing the evidence. "Mr. Miller," Maria said to Frank, her tone respectful but firm, "please walk me through the chain of custody for the video files from the moment of the incident." Frank, who had been standing by looking both awed and slightly useless, sprang to attention. He explained how he had isolated the footage and ensured it was locked from being overwritten. Maria nodded, impressed by his adherence to protocol in a chaotic situation. They made a secure copy of the footage onto an encrypted hard drive, which both she and Frank initialed and dated. Meanwhile, Serenity sat quietly in a chair Alana had pulled over for her, observing the process. Her mother had offered to let her wait in the car, but she had chosen to stay. She wanted to see this through. It felt important, like witnessing the final chapter of a book she had been forced to read. She watched as the corporate team took sworn statements, starting with Frank. He recounted the events factually and without embellishment, his respect for Serenity and his disapproval of Karen's actions clear in his measured retelling. Then, they interviewed two of the shoppers who had volunteered to stay and give witness statements, including the woman in the cashmere coat. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and her testimony was powerful. "I have never in my life witnessed such a disgusting abuse of authority," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling with residual anger. "That manager was completely unhinged. She racially profiled that young lady, assaulted her, and then tried to humiliate her. The girl, Serenity, was the picture of grace. She was more of an adult than the woman screaming at her." The young man who had filmed the incident, a college student named Leo, had already uploaded the video. It was rapidly gaining traction online, tagged with Botkeri Elysian Fields and harsh justice for Serenity. He provided the original, unedited file to the security team. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and now it was viral. The incident was no longer a private matter contained within the four walls of the store. It was a public firestorm. Throughout it all, Alana remained the calm center of the storm. She let her team do their jobs, observing their process with a critical eye. She spoke quietly with her legal team over the phone, discussing the potential for civil action against Karen for assault, but also the corporate liability of Elysian Fields. "This is not about revenge," Alana stated clearly into the phone, her voice audible to everyone in the room. "This is about accountability. Ms. Weston's actions were her own, but they occurred in our store while she was representing our brand. We have a systemic failure to address. I want a full review of our employee training programs, specifically regarding de-escalation, implicit bias, and customer interaction protocols. This cannot be a one-off firing. It must be a catalyst for institutional change." Her words resonated with Serenity. This was what her mother did. She didn't just fix broken machines. She fixed broken systems. She saw the root of a problem and re-engineered it from the ground up. The personal pain of the moment was being transformed into a blueprint for a better, fairer future for thousands of other employees and customers. When the corporate team had finished their initial evidence gathering, Maria approached Alana. "Dr. James, we have everything we need for now. The investigation will be swift. Ms. Weston has been placed on indefinite, unpaid leave, but given the video evidence and multiple eyewitnesses, termination is a certainty. The legal team is also reviewing to see if the local police department should be notified regarding the assault charge. My daughter will decide if she wishes to press charges," Alana stated. "The corporate response, however, is not optional." She looked at Maria. "Thank you. Your team was exemplary." As the corporate professionals began to pack up, the regional manager, Mark, approached Alana again. "Dr. James, I am so profoundly sorry. Is there anything at all I can do?" Alana looked at him. Then her eyes drifted to Frank, who was standing quietly by the door. "You can promote Mr. Miller," she said simply. "He demonstrated integrity and adherence to protocol under extreme pressure from a superior. He treated my daughter with respect when she was being denied it. That's the kind of person I want in a leadership position. Make him the new head of security for this location, effective immediately." Mark blinked, surprised, but then a look of understanding dawned on his face. "Yes, of course. Consider it done." Frank looked utterly stunned, his jaw slack. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He simply looked at Alana, his eyes filled with a profound gratitude. With the situation now firmly in the hands of her executive team, Alana decided it was time to go. She placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Let's go home, Serenity." As they walked out of the office and through the now quiet store, a few employees who had heard whispers of what had happened watched them with wide, curious eyes. They saw not a billionaire tycoon and her heir, but a mother and her daughter, walking side by side, a quiet, unbreakable unit. The echo of the slap had faded, replaced by the powerful hum of justice, methodical and absolute, beginning its inexorable work. The drive home was quiet. The 10-year-old sedan, a comfortable and familiar space, felt like a sanctuary after the harsh, artificial lighting of the department store. Alana drove, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes on the road. Serenity stared out the passenger window, watching the city blur past, the afternoon sun glinting off glass and steel. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a shared space for processing, for letting the adrenaline of the past few hours finally recede. The storm had passed, but the air was still charged with its memory. When they pulled into the driveway of their unassuming home, Alana turned off the engine but made no move to get out. She turned to her daughter, her face etched with a concern that had been carefully masked all afternoon. "Talk to me, Serenity," she said softly. How are you, really? Serenity continued to stare straight ahead, her gaze fixed on the familiar oak tree in their front yard. I don't know, she whispered, her voice fragile for the first time that day. I feel empty and shaky. She finally turned to look at her mother, and Alana could see the cracks in the strong facade her daughter had so bravely maintained. Serenity's eyes were glistening with unshed tears, and her lower lip trembled slightly. The composure that had been her armor was now gone, and in its place was the raw vulnerability of a 16-year-old girl who had been hurt. She hit me, Serenity said, her voice cracking. In front of all those people. She called me, you people. And for a second, Mom, I almost believed her. I almost felt like the person she was saying I was, small, worthless, a thief. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, the same cheek that still held a faint, residual flush from the slap. Alana's heart broke. She had spent Serenity's entire life trying to build a fortress of self-worth around her, brick by brick, lesson by lesson. But she knew that no fortress could ever be completely impervious to the ugliness of the world. She unbuckled her seatbelt and reached over, pulling her daughter into a fierce, protective embrace. Serenity buried her face in her mother's shoulder and finally let go. The silent, shaking sobs she had held back for so long racking her body. Alana held her tightly, stroking her hair, murmuring words of comfort. You are none of those things, Alana whispered into her hair. You hear me? You are brilliant and kind and strong. What that woman saw was not you. It was a reflection of the ugliness inside of her. That is her burden to carry, not yours. They sat like that for several minutes, the car a silent cocoon, until Serenity's sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, she said. Don't you ever apologize for your feelings, Alana said firmly, her eyes intense. Pain is not a weakness. It's a response to being wounded. What you did today, standing in the face of that hate and holding on to your dignity, that was one of the strongest things I have ever seen. I just kept thinking about what you always told me, Serenity said, her voice stronger now. Don't let them write your story. And you didn't, Alana said, a proud, fierce smile touching her lips for the first time that day. You stood your ground, and you let the truth speak for itself. You were your own hero today, Serenity. I was just the backup. Serenity managed a small, watery smile. Some backup. You own the whole place. Alana chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. That's just a tool, remember? My money, my company, they are just tools. Your character, your integrity, that's your power. And it was more than enough. They finally got out of the car and went inside. Alana made them both tea, and they sat at the kitchen table, the familiar ritual a comforting anchor. Do you want to press charges? Alana asked gently after a while. For the assault. It's your decision entirely. Whatever you choose, I will support you. Serenity thought for a long moment, stirring her tea. She replayed the moment in her mind, the crack of the slap, the sting on her skin, the faces in the crowd. Then she thought of Karen, crumpled and sobbing in the office, a woman whose life had just been irrevocably altered not by a single mistake, but by a lifetime of letting prejudice fester in her heart. No, she said finally, her voice firm. She's losing her job. Her reputation is ruined. The video is everywhere. That's enough. Filing a police report. It just feels like adding more anger to an already ugly situation. I don't want revenge, Mom. I just want things to be fair. Alana looked at her daughter, and her heart swelled with a love so profound it almost hurt. Serenity had faced down hatred and chosen grace. She had been given the power to crush someone and had chosen instead to simply let justice run its course. She had internalized the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in the ability to punish, but in the wisdom of restraint. "That's a very wise and very compassionate decision," Alana said, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. The last rays of the afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The crisis was over. The external battle had been won. Now, the quiet, internal work of healing the invisible scars would begin, and they would do it, as they did everything else, together. In the days that followed, the story exploded. Leo's video, raw and infuriating, became a viral sensation. It was picked up by local news, then national news outlets. The hashtag #Elysian Fields was trending for 48 hours straight. The court of public opinion had delivered a swift and unanimous verdict. Karen Weston became a household name for all the wrong reasons, a new avatar for a brand of public racism that was becoming increasingly visible in a hyper-connected world. For Elysian Fields, it was a public relations nightmare, but under Alana James's direction, it became something else, a case study in corporate accountability. Instead of issuing a vague, jargon-filled apology, the company released a statement directly from the COO, David Chen. It was clear, concise, and unflinching. It named Karen Weston, confirmed her termination, and described her actions as an appalling violation of our company's values and basic human decency. The statement detailed the promotion of Frank Miller, citing his integrity as the standard they expected from all employees, but it didn't stop there. The company announced it was closing all its stores nationwide for a full day the following month to conduct mandatory, third-party-led anti-racism and implicit bias training for every single employee, from the stockroom to the executive suite. They announced the creation of a new, independent civilian oversight board to review customer complaints of discrimination. Finally, they announced a multi-million-dollar grant to fund educational programs for underprivileged youth in the cities where their stores were located. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Pundits who were prepared to skewer the company for the incident were instead praising its swift, transparent, and comprehensive response. Elysian Fields hadn't just fired a bad apple, it had taken ownership of the systemic issues that allowed such an apple to rot in their barrel and had committed to fixing the orchard itself. For Karen Weston, the consequences were devastating. Fired and publicly shamed, she became a pariah. She was forced to sell her home to cover her living expenses and legal fees, as several other former customers came forward with stories of similar discriminatory treatment after seeing the news. She had lost everything, not because of one viral video, but because that video had exposed a deep-seated pattern of behavior built on a foundation of hate. Her life wasn't ruined by a 16-year-old girl. It was ruined by her own prejudice. Meanwhile, at the Northgate Mall Elysian Fields, the atmosphere had changed. Frank Miller, initially awkward in his new role as head of security, quickly grew into it. He commanded a new level of respect from the staff. He implemented a dignity-first policy, training his guards to de-escalate and communicate, to see the person before the potential problem. The employees, having just undergone the first wave of the new training, were more conscious, more aware. The air in the store felt lighter, more welcoming. A few weeks after the incident, Serenity decided she wanted to go back. She needed to close the loop, to overwrite the traumatic memory with a new, better one. Alana went with her, not as the owner, but as her mom. They walked through the wide glass doors, and the store felt different. A few employees recognized Serenity and offered her small, shy smiles of support. There were no suspicious glances, no one following her. They walked to the cosmetics department, back to aisle 4. The display of perfumes glittered under the lights. Serenity paused in the exact spot where it had all happened. She took a deep breath, held it, and then let it go, releasing the last vestiges of the fear and humiliation she had felt there. It was just an aisle in a store again. Then, they walked to the bookstore section. She found the astrophysics book she had been looking for, the one for her grandfather. She picked it up and walked to the checkout counter. The cashier, a young woman who had been there on the day of the incident, rang up the book. "I just want to say," the cashier said, her voice low and sincere, "we're all really sorry for what happened to you. It was wrong, and we're glad you came back." Serenity looked at her and smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Thank you," she said. As they left the store, book in hand, Serenity felt a sense of peace settle over her. Justice had been done, but more importantly, change had begun. A painful, ugly moment had been transformed into a catalyst for something good. Her mother had taught her that your dignity is the one thing no one can take from you. But she had learned something new on her own. That when you refuse to let them take your dignity, you sometimes inspire them to find their own. The ripples of that day in the store would continue to spread, washing away hate with waves of accountability. One person, one interaction, one moment of grace at a time. The incident at Elysian Fields became more than just a viral moment. It became a lesson. It showed that true power isn't wielded through anger or assumption, but through the quiet, unshakable force of integrity. Serenity's composure in the face of prejudice and her mother's use of authority not for revenge, but for reform, created a narrative of profound change. Justice wasn't found in the manager's downfall, but in the institutional awakening that followed. It served as a powerful reminder that while prejudice can be loud and violent, the truth, when revealed, carries a resonance that can dismantle old structures and build new foundations of respect. The world saw a story about a slap, but it learned a lesson about dignity, a quiet, resilient force that, when defended, can ultimately reshape the world around it, leaving a legacy not of conflict, but of progress.